You're listening to the May 5th, 2016 edition of the Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup, the weekly podcast that's focused on how the world of cybercrime is impacting business. The Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Hello everyone out there, I am Jeff Peters, Surfwatch Labs editor, and I'm here with Matt Leifus, Surfwatch Labs writer. Back from our break after taking off last week.
It's too short, Jeff. It was too short.
As always on this podcast, we got the top 5 trending cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions from the past week, based on data from Surfwatch Labs. So we'll jump right into the top cybercrime event.
Coming in at number 1, we have one for gamers out there. We have a hack with the popular game Minecraft. A security researcher says he has received data on more than 7 million user accounts for the Minecraft community called Lifeboat. And this includes email addresses and weekly as in not strong hashed passwords. Troy Hunt, who runs the Have I Been Pawned website, says he received the data from someone actively involved in trading who has been working with him in the past. And here's a quote from a Lifeboat representative, and this is what they told Motherboard via email. When this happened in early January, we figured the best thing for our players was to quietly force a password reset without letting the hackers know they had limited time to act. We did this over a period of some weeks. We retained no personal information, such as name, address, or age, about our players, so none were leaked. Some users are upset they were not informed of the breach, which makes sense, I would imagine. You know, if there was a breach and possibly your information was compromised, you'd want to know. Does that make sense, though? I mean, it sounds like they were trying to actually protect people as well.
Yeah, I mean, I understand where they were coming from, but it doesn't really make... Even if there's no personal information, you want to let people know that there's a breach, because obviously, like we talk about on this podcast all the time, there's so many situations where one password gets compromised and then they reuse that to get into another website or another account. So obviously, if you don't know that your information is potentially compromised, then you wouldn't be able to go change those passwords on other accounts.
Right.
Though to be honest, if you're one of those people that reuses passwords, you're probably not changing your passwords on all the other accounts anyways.
Right. Well, and I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't do that. But some people, that doesn't mean just because people aren't going to act, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't let them know what's going on.
One interesting thing to point out about this is that the company here that was hacked, this Lifeboat, they actually suggested that their users use short passwords. So everyone was kind of making fun of that.
What? Honestly?
Yeah. They basically said, hey, it's not like we're your bank. Use a short but difficult password. Which is kind of the opposite. You usually don't get people saying that.
A short and difficult password. Interesting. Okay.
Another interesting story that got a lot of headlines. Some of them are kind of overblown, I think. But there was this German nuclear plant. Malware was recently discovered at this nuclear power plant in Germany. But the plant said in a statement that it does not pose a risk to public or worker safety. They also said that all the computers responsible for controlling the plant are disconnected from the internet, and that all of the computers critical to running the plant had been checked and were not infected. But I did see a lot of articles talking about nuclear power plant breach, making it sound really
sure,
dramatic.
Well, it's that fear-mongering. If you think about it, what are some of the things that are feared most of being hacked? Probably our critical infrastructure and things like that. I mean, you talk about, a nuclear power plant was breached. Yeah, it sounds pretty bad, but I don't think that we haven't seen anything that's really dire, but it is more about the capabilities of...
Yeah, and that's the thing, if they were specifically targeting the plant, like if it was a SCADA-type malware that they found and someone was, doing espionage, that'd be different. But according to this German newspaper, ZEET Online, they found 2 different pieces of malware. One was Ramnet, and the other was the Configure worm. The reason they discovered this was because on April 7th, Block B of this nuclear power plant was actually taken offline for revision, and it's planned to be offline until like mid-May. And during this offline period, that's where they found this malware. And they said the likely source is removable media. The malware was reportedly found on 18 different removable data drives, mainly USB sticks. So likely people plugging stuff in and just spreading, some random malware. Nothing.
Right. And we've talked about that before in the past. You got to watch out, these USB sticks. Even at my office, at my house, you have all these USB sticks. You don't know. I think I have some from friends, maybe, just kind of sitting there, and you want to plug them in and see what's on them. Well, just imagine if you're doing that at like one of these companies or something like that, and they happen to contain some malware. You can
and I don't think this is one of the stories that made the top 5, but I don't know if you saw the story about the dental offices.
Yes,
they all got mailed. So apparently, rather than just let people download this manual, I think it was like an updated manual of dental codes, they decided to mail out like thousands of these like credit card things with like a USB in, and some of them had malware. So basically this dental association's mailing malware via USB drives to all these different dental offices.
Right.
So I think they learned their lesson, and they said they're going to look to different ways to distribute that information.
Might be a good idea in the future.
Yeah.
Sticking with this industrials and utility sector theme, which we actually had quite a few stories this week. Coming at number 3, we're going to talk about the Lansing Board of Water and Light, or BWL. BWL was forced to shut down all of its systems and phone lines due to a ransomware attack. The ransomware was spread through an email containing a malicious attachment, pretty common. This was opened by an employee of the company. The ransomware attack didn't compromise any customer or user data. However, it did leave about 250 BWL employees unable to do their jobs as they were dealing with the threat. It's unknown what type of ransomware was used in the attack. The general manager for BWL described the virus as brand spanking new, which is why up-to-date antivirus software didn't quarantine it. The utility company learned that only 3 antivirus solutions could even detect this variant of crypto ransomware. Again, I haven't read or seen anything on exactly what this is. So that I don't know if any more information will be given on that in the future or not.
Moving on to our number 4 trending attack this past week, we have the Canadian gold mining firm GoZ Corp. They suffered a data breach last week, and the hackers responsible for the attack were able to obtain 14.8 gigabytes of employee data. It's a pretty hefty amount.
Yes, it is.
The hackers offered a sample download of the data that contained information on conversation between employees from 2013 to 2014. This was about performance and compensation, proprietary information, bank account information. There was budget information for 2016 in there, international contacts, and employee directories. Another data dump from the breach contains even more information, including payroll information, tax data, and employee login credentials. So this sounds like probably the most serious one of the week.
Yeah, and it was only trending at number 4. Imagine that. There's some valuable information in there, potentially. We'll have to see what happens with that one as well. That's one of the problems when we talk about some of these data breaches, though, isn't it? You hear the news. Sometimes it's hard to see what actually happens with the information. You know what I mean?
Yeah, unless there's really like a lawsuit or something that really brings the story back into light, and you get, like if there's legal action, you get the complaints and the indictments, and you get a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff about what actually happened, but I tried reaching out for a while to interview people. I always thought this would be a fascinating idea for a book to talk to all these small businesses, because there's this stat that gets thrown around all the time. I think it's from Semantic from years ago. It says 70% of whatever percent of small businesses fail after a data breach. So I thought, wouldn't it be cool to get all these stories of people whose businesses have failed? My naive self. I mean, who wants to talk about that? But I always thought that would be interesting to actually do, every week, profile a different business and talk about the problems and the fallout. But yeah, people don't want to talk about that.
It'd be great information. That would be awesome information. But yeah, I just want to talk to you about your failed venture in business. What happened.
I actually had a 6-month period where I was interviewing people, and I would always, I'd ask them, because I thought this was just a great idea. Because there's not enough stories. You always hear all these dumb stats, but there's not enough stories. Stories are what people are going to remember and make them change. And so, I used to always ask people. I'd tell them, hey, if you know anyone, and but no one ever.
No one wanted to be a part of
there
that.
There was one guy who knew somebody, and then I've sent him a message on Twitter, and then he sent me one back. I was like, oh, never mind. They can't talk about it.
Oh, well.
And I was like, dang it, that was my one lead.
Right. Moving on to number 5, we have the Kenya Ministry of Defense, and we're going to talk about Anonymous again. Members of Anonymous in Kenya hacked the country's Kenya's Ministry of Foreign Affairs database and leaked about 1 terabyte of data on the dark web. The data dump contained 95 PDF and docx files totaling around 1 terabyte information. Anonymous said this activity is linked with Op Africa, which is a campaign launched by the group at the end of January 2016. So there's your weekly Anonymous.
Can't go a week without Anonymous.
No, you can't.
Now moving on, we'll jump into some of the different cybercrime advisories that a lot of researchers and other people were talking about this week. The first one that was trending in SurfWatch Labs data had to do with the Android operating system. The Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, the ISAC, they released a critical alert for Android. Multiple vulnerabilities have been discovered in the Android operating system, the most severe of which could allow for remote code execution. So these vulnerabilities could be exploited through multiple methods, including email, web browsing, and multimedia messages when processing media files. According to the alert from the ISAC, there are no reports of these vulnerabilities being exploited in the wild. However, Android builds prior to version 6.01 and without security patch levels of May 1st, 2016 are affected by these vulnerabilities. So you should be aware of that for all those people using smartphones, tablets, watches, all that kind of stuff.
Keep your software up to date.
Yeah, keep it up to date. Although it is a little tricky, though, with Android devices because depending on the device you have,
that's true.
They gotta push it out.
Coming in at number 2, this was pretty interesting. We have increased extortion activity that's affiliated with known hacktivists. SurfWatch Labs has observed open source chatter with increased reports of large organizations receiving extortion-based email messages from the Armada Collective, threatening a DDoS attack unless a Bitcoin ransom is paid within a certain time frame. There's also recent reports of large US-based companies receiving similar threats using the actor name Lizard Squad. Multiple anti-DDoS providers have so far reported this as being an empty threat as the date of this alert. So, what's happening here is people are using, they're saying they're part of the Armada Collective, or they're saying they're part of Lizard Squad. They're threatening to do a DDoS attack unless they get a ransom. They probably don't have any DDoS capabilities, and they're just using the name to try to extort.
Yeah, from the couple articles I read, the Armada Collective attacks anyways, I know that they were actually paid over $100,000 from these different, basically fake extortion attempts without actually DDoSing anyone, which we said before on the podcast. That's really we're seeing a lot with ransomware too. It's just the most direct way to get paid is just to say, hey, victim, give me money. In this case, you just have to threaten that you're going to do some action. Moving on to number 3, we have more alerts from the FBI about ransomware.
Yay!
And I actually, on a side note, I actually saw that the FBI specifically said, do not pay ransoms.
Yeah.
So it's just...
They made it a point to say that in this one, yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of articles about that because the FBI previously said maybe you should, and then some members of Congress got mad. So now they're saying definitely don't.
Right.
But anyways, they issued a new alert about the rise of these ransomware threats, and they warned, not surprisingly, that these attacks are going to continue to increase in 2016. So if you listen to this podcast, it's probably not any new news coming from there. So according to this alert, they said that ransomware has been around for a few years, but during 2015, law enforcement saw an increase in these types of cyber attacks, particularly against organizations because the payoffs are higher. They went on to say that if the first 3 months of this year are any indication, the number of ransomware incidents and the ensuing damage they cause will grow even more in 2016 if individuals and organizations don't prepare for these attacks in advance.
Yeah, and that it's very easy to see that alert, guys. Just go to FBI.gov. They actually have a lot of good information, and they have a really large list of actionable steps that you could take to defend yourself. It's actually a really long list. It's its own PDF file that you download to read. So Make sure you check that out. Coming in at number 4, we have information being exposed on Pond List. As a matter of fact, 866 million users had their information exposed. This on May 16th, 2016, so in the future here, the Pond List website will be shutting down operations after a software bug exposed the information of these 866 million users. Pawn List is a service that informs users when their website has been pawned or their personal information has been compromised. This news comes after security researcher Brian Krebs informed the company about the issue. And Pawn List released a statement to all their clients basically thanking them for subscribing. They gave a little background information about when the company was launched. And then they announced that, again, the service will be decommissioned as of May 16, 2016. They also let people know, they give them some information for customers if they want to get identity protection. They give some information on that.
Yeah, and I think all this data had previously been exposed, but they just kind of aggregated it all in one place, is my understanding. This actually kind of ties into the number 5 trending advisory. This also has to do with a big pool of stolen credentials being put online. Security researchers discovered an online forum with a young Russian hacker who was bragging about having over 270 million stolen email credentials. Just a quick breakdown of what he had. I think 57 million were Russian accounts, 40 million were Yahoo accounts, 33 million were Hotmail. People still using Hotmail, evidently.
Yeah.
And 24 million Gmail accounts. So in this case, of those 270 million, most of these credentials have been spotted before. However, 42.5 million of the accounts appeared to be new ones, showing up for the first time, meaning that they're not from previous data breaches. But I think these stories kind of go together, and some of the events we talked about at the beginning of the podcast is just the reuse of these credentials. So when you're talking about, like, for instance, when you're talking about Lifeboat not informing their users that their passwords were potentially out there, that's kind of, we have these huge lists now, approaching 1 billion different users just getting shared. So if your stuff is out there, there's a good chance that some of these criminals are trying to use it to get into different accounts that you might use. So yeah, that wraps up the top advisories from the past week. Moving on to the last section of the podcast, we have our trending legal news from the past week. And one thing I wanted to talk about that I thought was pretty interesting, again, not really earth-shattering news, but the New York Attorney General, his office put out a press release just a couple days ago saying that they have seen a 40% increase in the number of data breach notices compared to last year, and that the expected tally at the end of this year should be over 1,000, which would be a new record for the state. Last year, I believe it was just over 800, so they're expecting a pretty significant bump this year. Obviously, that's not, shocking news. We're seeing more data breaches, but there was also the Verizon's data breach investigations report came out, and they found last year 3,141 confirmed data breaches. That's a hefty amount.
It is a hefty amount.
And that's up 48% from last year's total, which was 2,122. So we're seeing more data breaches everywhere. And the point of this press release from the New York Attorney General, they were just saying that they're joining ranks with some other states that are now allowing companies the ability to file breach notices electronically. So to make it a little bit easier on them, and probably easier on the state too, because rather than dealing with all the mail and stuff. So I just thought that was interesting that obviously you don't ever really know the total amount of data breaches because you don't know how many aren't going reported or how many people don't even know about. But I just thought it's always interesting to see like the actual numbers, from Verizon, 3,141 breaches. And then New York alone expecting over 1,000 this year. So that's interesting, I thought.
Yeah, it definitely gives it some scope, so you kind of understand what you're dealing with. Yeah, and it's impossible. I would actually probably think that number is much higher if you really think about it. It just kind of echoes what we talk about without being fear mongering. Apocalypse is coming, cybersecurity news people. But data breaches are happening much more frequently. and it's never been more important to make sure you're protected. Coming in number 2, we have a hospital trust that was fined €185,000 by the Information Commissioner's Office. The Information Commissioner's Office oversees data privacy in the UK. They fined the Blackpool Teaching Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust, again, the €185,000 for inadvertently publishing the personal information of 6,574 employees online. The trust voluntarily collected information on its staff in order to publish annual equality and diversity metrics on its website. Unfortunately, the spreadsheets published online had hidden data that was easily accessible by simply double-clicking the table. This led to individuals' confidential data being exposed, including national insurance number, date of birth, religious belief, and sexual orientation. That's kind of weird stuff to have included with that, isn't it?
They were collecting this data voluntarily
to
basically promote on their website. Yeah, basically saying,
because I'm thinking healthcare, like religious belief. I was like, what? Okay. The trust failed to notice the mistake for 10 months and then took a further 5 months to alert affected staff, which to me that's the really egregious part of this from what I'm reading.
Another interesting piece of news, the new version of the PCI data security standards were released last week. And they had a few different things in there. One of the main things, though, Troy Leach, he's the Chief Technology Officer for the PCI Security Standards Council. And he was quoted in a few different articles making the rounds this week talking about it. Just really about how they have this new rule in there, really trying to push accountability and awareness towards the executive level. So this new rule mandates that, quote, executive management establish responsibilities for the protection of cardholder data and a PCI DSS compliance program, which sounds pretty basic, but he was just trying to really push the point that they really want to get awareness and responsibility towards the C-suite. You can't just delegate this stuff. You got to actually be involved in it and know about it and keep track of it. Then another big aspect of this everyone's talking about is the expansion of multi-factor authentication. It's not just for like remote access anymore. Now anyone who has administrative access to the card data has to have multi-factor authentication to comply with PCI. And there's a few other changes in there, some more technical stuff. So you should just be aware of that. If you handle payment cards, you should at least check out the changes and get yourself updated, or go to the website and download the new guide, all that stuff.
Coming in at number 4, and before I get into this, I'm actually surprised. Now, we've talked about Donald Trump quite a bit in this political season. I'm surprised we haven't had to talk about Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders. And Hillary Clinton has a lot of things. I don't think we've really gotten into her and her emails, but we're going to get into her and her emails.
I try to avoid talking politics on this podcast, but Donald Trump just somehow seeps his way into everything.
Oh, because, he gets actually attacked a little bit, the business owner aspect of everything. Well, we have a Romanian hacker, and he has claimed to have breached Hillary Clinton's server. In an interview with Fox News, a Romanian hacker who goes by the name Gucifer claimed that he accessed the private email server of Hillary Clinton by first compromising Clinton confidant Sidney Blumenthal's AOL account and then using that as a stepping stone. Gucifer is currently in a Virginia detention center after having been extradited to the U.S. on federal hacking charges against unnamed victims that are believed to include Colin Powell, a member of the Bush family, and Blumenthal, and this was reported by Fox News. Fox News was not able to verify Gucifer's claims. A Clinton campaign statement said, quote, there is absolutely no basis to believe the claims made by this criminal from his prison cell.
Yeah, and Gucifer, for example, going back to the member of the Bush family, I don't know if you remember a couple years ago, the George Bush self-portraits that were leaked, that was Gucifer. A lot of other entertainers and stuff had their emails hacked. But there was a lot of information actually in that Fox News article just about the different ways that he, just if you want to see how simple it is for these hacks to occur, he talks about how he would spend a lot of time on the internet, and he got into this Sidney Blumenthal's AOL account by guessing his security question, the answer to the security question, and then from there he was able to get a lot of other information on different contacts, such as Colin Powell and Hillary Clinton, and other celebrities. And it's a good lesson in learning how one piece of information can snowball onto another piece, and who knows whether he really did this, but that's what he's claiming. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of news about that potentially, seeing as she's probably going to be the Democratic nominee.
Yeah, we'll have to see about that. I'm sure I'm not gonna be surprised by anything Donald Trump kind of throws at her way when they start debating. So
this will probably be in the national news cycle for the next 6 months to the point. I think everyone's already sick of talking about it, but
oh yeah,
I think once Trump gets his hand on it and starts coming up with slogans, it'll be even worse. And then the final legal item, just a quick note on the creator of GoZ. The creator of this GoZ malware has been ordered to pay $7 million. The guy who created this, he's a Russian citizen, just 28 years old, and he created this popular GoZ banking Trojan. It would steal login information, and basically he used that information to make tons of money off it. But the interesting thing to note about this guy is that according to the Department of Justice press release, I don't know if they credit him as necessarily the founder, but one of the people who really pioneered the cybercrime as a service model that we talk about all the time of criminals renting out their malware. He was really one of the first people. He would rent out this GoZ malware. People could, use it to infect people, and then as long as they paid the fee, he would give them, the information that they stole. So he made quite a bit of money that way. So he was sentenced to time served. So he served 37 months already, and so he was sentenced to time served plus restitution in the amount of $6.9 million.
Oh, oops.
Yeah.
That's quite a sum.
Yeah, so that wraps up the top trending cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions from the past week. Real quick, before we end the podcast, we'll throw over to Matt for the funny story of the week.
This is one of those stories that kind of makes me question what I'm doing with my life. Apparently, a 10-year-old was awarded $10,000 for uncovering a security flaw on Instagram, which just so happens to be the top bug bounty reward awarded by Facebook. Obviously, Facebook owns Instagram, that's why they're involved. The boy is from Helsinki, and he discovered the vulnerability in March. And so what was this vulnerability? The flaw discovered by the boy would have allowed a hack to delete comments and descriptions connected to Instagram photos by inserting malicious code into the comment field. The boy said there was no limitation on what could have been deleted, and he went on to joke, saying that he would have been able to eliminate anyone, even Justin Bieber. So I think that kind of shows where Justin Bieber is popular in the world. The basic requirements for the bug bounty program, they do have an age specification, which this boy at 10 years old did not meet. However, due to the severity of the flaw, Facebook paid the young boy the reward anyway. I thought it made me laugh. It made me a little depressed because here's a 10-year-old that could figure something like that out. I could never figure something like that out. But it was pretty neat.
A kid who's not even old enough to use Instagram probably has more money in his bank account than a lot of people I know.
So, bravo, young man, and thank you for your service to Instagram and Facebook.
And that'll do it for this week's podcast. As always, the Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs helps organizations and service providers quickly establish a strategic cyber threat intelligence operation that drives more effective use of their tactical defenses. For more information on cyber threat intelligence, check out surfwatchlabs.com.